Oops.
Hello everyone, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you James for making time in your incredibly hectic schedule. So, first question, you and Tom Tugendhat both have military experience. If terrorists should take over Downing Street under your Prime Ministership, which of you is most likely to be found crawling through the vents with a knife between your teeth in a sort of Air Force One style scenario?
Tom was an intelligence officer, so if people have got as far as Downing Street and he didn't tell us, then he's in trouble.
And you're an artillery man. So
and I'm an artillery officer, so I should be about 10 miles away blowing everything up. So there you go. Choose your poison. Choose your poison.
Fair enough. I'm going to start with a focus group carried out by Labour Together on why they won the election and why we lost it. They asked the British public to summarise the Tory party in one word. Oh. The top answers were corrupt, liars, rich, useless, rubbish, bad, incompetent, untrustworthy, and blue.
Blue?
But yeah. How do you, James Cleverly, turn that around?
Well, funnily enough, all those things, I think, show why policy is important, but not the first thing we need to resolve. Because all of those things are tonal. They're all sniff test type stuff. They voted us out because they didn't like us, not because they didn't agree with us, but because they didn't like us. And that is totally our fault. We achieved a lot of very good stuff whilst we were in government, but when I was knocking on doors, none of it got cut through. The voters did not want to listen to anything that we were saying and anything that we were doing. And I think our behaviour, our tone, our actions amplified the mistakes. All governments make mistakes, but our actions, particularly in the parliamentary party, amplified the negatives and completely obscured the positives. So, for example, the example I gave was COVID. So, in that word cloud, there were, I have no doubt, references to things like PPE contracts, things like, you know, the breaking lockdown rules. But we also did furlough and the vaccine. But no one brings up furlough and the vaccine, everyone brings up the negatives, and that's totally our fault. So the first thing we need to do, the first thing I would do, is completely reset the tone, how we talk, how we behave. And the reason I'm best placed to do that is because the only thing I would ask of others is that they do what I have always done. No backstabbing, no backbiting. All this briefing against each other and trying to defenestrate leaders is absolutely toxic. I said so at the time, I've been proven right. So don't do it. And if we stop doing it, we can win back the trust of the British people, and then, and only then, can we start putting forward some policy solutions to the inevitable challenges that we'll inherit from an awful, awful, awful Labour government. And
on that note, have you been disappointed by the tone of the campaign? It was reported last week that a dossier about you was being circulated among...
Oh, that was hurtful. My God, that was hurtful. That was... yeah, just to let you know, I think there's been a series of revelations which I think I should address, because until you concede you've got a problem, you can't start on the road to recovery. So the first, I was outed as being a Warhammer fan. Something I hope to keep private, but it's there now. I'll learn to deal with it. The evil dossier said that apparently I lied about the fact I went to private school. First I've heard it. I make reference to it in almost every speech that I give. I also make reference to the fact that my parents weren't able to afford 2 sets of school fees, which is why I'm an only child. And now the Labour Party is trying to prevent parents like mine being able to give the next generation of youngsters the opportunity that they gave me through their own personal sacrifice. So I'll fess up to that one. And then the other one, apparently, they went digging through reports at school and discovered that on a geography field trip to Exeter, I once left my wet walking boots in the wrong place. I know. And I know that I've lost the room. I know that you can never vote for me again. Thank you, ladies, and good night.
But are you disappointed by the tone of the campaign?
Look, all I can say is I've always behaved in a certain way. Anyone who aspires to leadership should ask themselves the question: would I accept behaviour from my subordinates that, would I be willing to accept behaviour that I have displayed from my subordinates if I were in a position of leadership? I can always say yes. If everyone else can do likewise, excellent. But I, for my own part, know that if I demand people mimic my behaviour when I was a subordinate, then my leadership would be a success. And if everyone else can say that, fine.
So on your, turning to policy issues, Centre for Policy Studies, rather than Centre for Other Stuff first and then policy afterwards, great as that motto is. Your website starts lower taxes, smaller state, higher military spending. How do you square that circle? In one of your recent articles, you made reference to an OBR report which said that state spending is set to mushroom from 40% of GDP to 60% over the next 50 years. The share of GDP taken by the NHS set to double due to ageing population. Like, how do you square the circle? How do you lower taxes? How do you increase defence spending? What do you cut?
Well, I'm not going to go into the full breakdown, and I was conscious when we put forward that mix of principles as much as policies. I was very conscious that that might appear to be a contradiction, but just let's get some order of magnitude stuff in place here. The welfare budget alone, from pre-COVID to now, has jumped by about 3% of GDP. It's now 11% of GDP. I'm talking about increasing defence spending from about 2.3% of GDP to 3% of GDP, a 0.7% increase. It is already dwarfed by the increase we've seen in the welfare budget. So if we brought the welfare budget back down to pre-COVID levels, we could carve off a little bit of that saving and get defence to 3%. So 3% is actually quite a modest aspiration. And the reason I say that, and I always confront people with when they say this, is if you think that 3% on preventing us going to war is expensive, wait until you find out how expensive it is actually going to war. 40%, an estimated 40% of Ukraine's GDP is now directed towards its war effort. 3% is cheap at twice the price. It really, really, really is. So we should have the courage to say, if you don't have defence, you don't have anything. And I'm not going to get blown off course from this. I'm absolutely committed to this. We've got to make the money work for defence, and we will be able to make the savings elsewhere.
Speaking of savings, one very good target for savings you might think would be handing £200 a year in heating allowances to some of the richest and wealthiest and most affluent people in the country, yet you and others have opposed that. Why?
Because I don't like people lying to other people to win an election. And the Labour...
You went into politics, you say?
Well, no, look, I'm happy to be held to account for promises that I've made. And actually, during this leadership campaign, I said to my campaign team, a number of whom are in the room, and they will confirm this, I hope, behind my back. I said, say nothing during this campaign that will undermine our ability to lead the party. Do not make promises in order to win that you know you cannot deliver if you win. That has always been my foundation saying. The Labour Party not only failed to tell the British people that they were going to take this money from pensioners, they actually said the opposite. They were criticising us, saying they never would, the Tories might, but they never would. So they lied about it. So lying is not a good start. And also, the way they've gone about it, is absolutely immoral. I've got a rural constituency. There are many people in my constituency who are not on the gas grid, and they rely on heating oil being delivered in bulk. Many of them use that winter fuel allowance to literally buy fuel for the winter. They are discovering now, with no notice and no ability to fund that fuel purchase another way, that their fuel tank will literally be empty this winter. And these are in isolated rural communities. It is perverse, it is immoral, it is wrong. And if you want to balance the books, yes, let's have a conversation about balancing the books. But we should learn from Labour's error. And if we're going to make difficult choices, and I've said that we do need to reduce public spending, we should be honest about that We should let people know what our priorities are, what we will protect, what we will change, what we will reduce, what we will scrap altogether. But the Labour Party are being hurt now because they, as their first acting government, did something incredibly dishonest. And liars do not get rewarded at the ballot box.
And another issue which I kind of has been around and I probably have to raise is maternity pay. Do you have any take on that? Yeah, look,
if we want the highly productive female half of the British population to credibly be able to help us boost our economy, we have got to make sure that the talent embedded in the female workforce can get back to work. I think maternity pay incredibly important. I'm not going to get drawn on other people's comments, but I make a point about women returning to work. One of my real frustrations is the situation with nursery places. And it goes to the heart of the bad habit that we've slipped into. So we have excessively taxed and regulated the private nursery sector. To such an extent, it is now largely unaffordable. It's twice the price of the French equivalent, 3 times the price of the German equivalent. So many working women on actually pretty good
we effectively destroyed the childminding sector.
Absolutely. So we regulated something out of existence, including when families want to look after the children within their own family. So we did that. We then made the sector so expensive that working women could not afford to use it, so they could not go back to work. So what did we do? What we did is we decided to subsidise the cost of that ridiculously unnecessary expensive childcare, being administered by civil servants, paid for by tax, and the subsidy, of course, paid for by tax. Who's paying that tax? The women who have just gone back to work. So basically, we create a problem, we then tax and subsidise a solution, and we have this vicious cycle where we're taxing women more, shuffling around in a wasteful civil service system in order to give them back a little bit of their own money to pay for something that we made unnecessarily expensive. And what we should have done is actually had a more natural, organic childcare system, sector, market, whatever you call it, rather than making it so expensive in the first place.
So you said lower taxes, obviously a good thing for any Tory audience, good thing for Centre for Policy Studies. Are there tax? I mean, obviously you can't commit to a thing, but if in an ideal world, if someone magically gave you 5 or 10 billion quid to spend, what would be your priorities on that front?
Sorry, hang on. Let me understand the question. So
if you're in government and you suddenly discover that there's been a massive windfall, you've got 10 billion quid to spend, and you can spend it on tax cuts, what are the priorities that you think?
You don't spend money on tax cuts. It's not government money No. This really gets me. And sorry, I don't mean to have a go at you, but I'm going to have a real go at you now.
Right.
Language matters so much. Please tell me I'm not the only one that can hear that. This is not. All right, fine. So this betrays distorted thinking that governments have to fund tax cuts, that somehow we have to justify tax cuts. Governments should not fund stripping money from people. Sorry, wrong. Governments should not justify letting people keep their own money. We should justify stripping money from people forcefully through laws. So the justification burden sits in the wrong bit of the equation. So when I say I want to cut taxes, people turn around and say, oh, you have to justify that. I'm like, no, bollocks. You justify why these people can't keep more of their own money. The starting point for private wealth is with the private person, with the individual. If a government wants it off them, I should be the one justifying stripping their money away from them. They shouldn't have to expect me to justify not stripping money off them. And so when you say, how would I pay for that? You don't pay for a tax cut. People pay taxes. You don't pay for a tax cut. So what I would do, but in actual answer to your question, I would prioritise cutting taxes that are stagnating markets. I've already talked about the fact that we tax and subsidise the childcare market rather than liberating the childcare market. It's a small but important example. One of the other things, as I say, I don't like taxes that put sand in the gears of the machines. One of the reasons why I talked about stamp duty, because it stagnates the housing market. There are people, there are a couple next to our house in London. There are a couple, they live in, I think it's a 4, it might even be a 5-bedroom, Edwardian detached family house. Their kids moved out 35 years ago. There are 3 or 4 unutilised bedrooms, and those bedrooms have been unutilised for 35 years in a city that has a housing supply problem. But they don't downsize because they will get smashed to bits through tax if they did. And because they can't downsize, a family can't upsize. And because that family can't upsize, the family lower down the kind of the housing ladder can't upsize. And I know it sounds weird, but because that 5-bedroom family home has 4 underutilised bedrooms, there's at least 1, probably 2, maybe 3 people who want to get on the housing ladder who can't because the whole system is gummed up. So let's unlock the system. And then the final point, what's the first thing that people do when they move into a new house? They get the builders in, they get the painters and decorators in, they buy new white goods, they actually pump money into their local economy, all of which is stagnated because we're hoping to harvest a tax, which because they haven't moved in 35 years, we don't even harvest. It's not even as if we get the money.
So I agree with every single word of that. But
Good.
of course, there is another way to solve the housing crisis, which is to build some damn houses.
Bingo.
Which is not something your party, our party, has been very good at in recent years.
Yeah, well, we should change that. We should change. We do need to build more. We do need to build more houses. Look, and the supply side needs to come up. One of the things that we need to do is we need to reassure people that they are not personally going to lose out. NIMBY is a really pernicious term because it implies that someone who is saying no to something is doing something, greedy or unfair or illogical. So if I have paid extra to have a house overlooking fields and I can see the church spire in the background, I've paid money because that house has a nicer view than a similar house half a mile away that doesn't have the view. And then someone basically says, oh, by the way, we're going to build a block of flats at the end of your garden. I have materially lost out. There's money that I've spent to get something I haven't got. It is not unfair and it's not illogical, but we don't do anything to kind of recognise that loss. And because of that, we keep failing to get the authority of the British people to build more houses. So we should recognise that people have a legitimate concern not to lose something that they paid for, even if that thing is a view. To provide a degree of reassurance, we have incredibly low density cities. We can increase the density of our cities quite significantly, unlock literally hundreds of thousands or millions of new dwelling units as flats, as maisonettes. My team laugh at this. Cal's over there. I come with my team laugh at it. I drive past bungalows and I go bonkers. Bungalows in suburban Britain, I think, are a perversity. I understand why people, particularly older people, want to have 1-floor living, but why have we not got a younger family in the 2 floors above that? There is a whole load of space that we could utilise, and you can build beautiful. Look at Georgian homes. Georgians typically built to 3, 4, sometimes 5 stories, and they built beautiful. So you can build up and build beautiful. You don't have to sprawl outwards like the Victorians did. You can have homes near the infrastructure, near the jobs, near the schools, and they are homes that people will love and cherish and refurbish rather than knock down and rebuild. If you do that, you address the other half of the equation, which is the supply side.
I do agree with you. You would just be careful, because one of my colleagues who's written about housing for 20 years said the only paper he's ever written that got him fan mail was when he wrote that we should have more bungalows. There is a big program.
I know.
But, yeah.
And I know I get everyone loves it, but it's weird. Sorry, I don't want to go down a rabbit hole on this one, but we have this very weird attitude to protecting vertical space that we don't have we have this weird attitude to vertical space. We don't have the horizontal space. If someone turned around and said, "Oh, I'm going to get this building plot, and I'm going to have a 100-yard garden in every direction, and have this little plot right in the middle," you'd all look at that and go, "That is nonsense." So vertically, we recognise the nonsense of underutilising available development space, and yet somehow vertically we go, "Yeah, no, it's completely fine." Weird.
I know lots of people want to ask questions, but I'm going to ask two more before we finish. So,
shorter my answer.
Yeah. One thing we haven't talked about so far, one thing your website doesn't talk about, but one of the thing which was one of the three big things that cost the Tories the election is the NHS. How do you? Did the party break the NHS? Does it need more money? Does it need reform? How can the party be trusted on that issue? You had people, I'm sure you had it, because every one of your colleagues I've spoken to had it, opening the door and saying, "How are you going to vote?" And they said, "Well, I'm a doctor, so I'm a nurse, so."
Yeah, we do get that. The NHS has lots and lots and lots of money, and we have now, I think, tested to almost breaking point the idea that just more money will sort it out. Even the Labour Party have now come to the conclusion that without meaningful reform, there is no upper limit to the amount of money that you can plough into the NHS, and it's still not resolved the issues that needs to resolve. So we absolutely do need to reform the NHS. I think as Conservatives, again, we have to recognise the reality of the situation. We need to be very, very careful to make sure our ideas are not either inadvertently or cynically misrepresented. So my mum was a midwife in the NHS. I was born in the hospital that she worked in. My two sons were born in the hospital that she worked in, delivered by a midwife that she trained. The NHS saved my wife's life recently. So I love the NHS. And because I love it, I want it to be sustainable into the future. And at the moment, I can see a route where that might not happen. The above inflation cost growth is unsustainable. It is unsustainable. And look, whilst not wanting to over-personalise this, my wife's sister, in an act of solidarity, when Susie was diagnosed with breast cancer, my wife's sister went to get checked up, not because she thought there was anything wrong, but literally as an act of solidarity. And she was diagnosed with early stage breast cancer. And because she was diagnosed early, her treatment was quicker, less painful, less intrusive, and was all done and dusted within months. Susie is now into year 3 of a treatment regime which will probably go on for most of the rest of her life, perhaps all of the rest of her life. Her sister's treatment, as I say, was quicker, was less painful, less intrusive, and infinitely cheaper. Infinitely cheaper. So if we could get more of the money and the focus and the effort at the front end, screening, early diagnosis, prevention, rather than what we currently do, which is backload it to keep unwell people alive and in pain for extended periods of time, people's lives would be better, the system would be more sustainable, we would be healthier and happier, and it would be, I think, a prize really well worth pursuing. But as I say, we have to be so careful with how we talk about this, because there is a whole army of politically motivated people out there who want to misrepresent our intentions and our words, and we mustn't give them any ammunition to do so.
Fair enough. So last question from me. One of the few areas of real policy difference between the candidates in this campaign has been on immigration, in particularly the ECHR. You say, you point out that the measures that came in under you during your time as Home Secretary have seen immigration falling. I mean, is that job done? What else needs to be done, and why does that not include the ECHR, in your view?
Look, a couple of things. I'll go from the most philosophical, then I'll go to the more granular. We talked about my time in the military. As I say, I'm not a war hero. I didn't do anything particularly interesting or exciting in my long and rather dull military career. But I did read a lot about how good generals are successful. Good generals fight battles on the battlefield of their choosing. Wellington chose Mont Saint-Jean, which we call Waterloo, because there was a reverse slope, a ridge, an anchor point at the left, the centre and the right of the battlefield, a gentle slope with a muddy field in front of it. And he knew 2 years before the Battle of Waterloo where he would fight. He would keep his reserves on the reverse slopes, they were protected from French artillery, and he would make the French cavalry and infantry trudge through the mud.
By the way, if the whole leadership thing doesn't work out, you've got a great future in military podcasts.
So he won the Battle of Waterloo because the battle was fought at the battlefield of Waterloo. Generals pick where they want to fight, and in politics, we should pick the issues on which we want to fight. I am not going to fight a battle on the battlefield dictated to me by Nigel Farage. He wants us to have this row at this point in time, and I don't want to let him. And I think it's politically naive if we allow ourselves to have his row when we should be making our case. That's the difference between an experienced leader and 3 inexperienced leaders. That's why you should make me party leader.
Okay. See, I was actually tempted to ask that question about about your experiences versus theirs, but you brought it up yourself, so that's fine. Questions?
Oh, losing the room.
Sorry.
Thank you. Hi, it's Jennifer Scott from Sky News. There's been a lot of talk that for you to end up in the final 2, that you and Tom Tugendhat would have to do some sort of deal so that the backers back one of you rather than it just ending up being Kemi and Robert at the end. Are there any deals taking place?
I don't do deals. I win by winning.
And you're confident that you'll make it to the final 2?
I'm confident I'll make it to the final 1.
Very good, thank
you. Emma, please use your judgment.
Thank you. Tom Danaher from Edinburgh Conservatives, despite the accent. How would the Scottish Conservatives recover from a historically low vote share under your leadership?
Well, the first thing, when I talk about party unity, I think people assume that I mean, you know, kind of left, right, centre within the Westminster Parliamentary Party. And whilst that is part of it, that's not really what I mean. What I mean is making sure that as a party as a whole, the Voluntary Party, Holyrood, Cardiff Bay, City Hall in London, our Metro mayors, party professionals, CCHQ are all working together. It really frustrates me when, as a unionist party, we allow ourselves to think of Scotland as some other place. And one of my other frustrations is when we exclusively, when we think about Scottish politics, we always flick back to kind of unionism, make it about the union. The bottom line is Scottish voters are worried about schools, they're worried about taxes, they're worried about policing, they're worried about all the same issues as English voters and Welsh voters and Northern Irish voters. So we shouldn't just keep defaulting back to this one issue of differentiation. And ultimately, we need to make sure we are working right across the UK as a team with a consistent message, consistent philosophy, which, yes, has regional details, but it's consistent so that people know what they're getting and we can be credible when we put forward solutions. And the main thing, it goes back to the point I'm saying earlier, we've got to win the trust of voters again, because as I say, they rejected us because we gave them too many excuses to dislike us. And we need to get that right first.
Neil at the front.
Thank you. Neil Record, former chairman of the Institute of Economic Affairs. Can I just pick up a little more on the NHS, James? So under your leadership, would you want the party to think more seriously and indeed perhaps adopt fundamental reform, i.e. moving to a social insurance system like Australia or actually the whole of the rest of the Western world?
So I think there are certain things, whilst I'm going to keep So we do have to think, and we are going to have to do some serious thinking about how we make a health system in the modern world work and work properly. Our starting point, and other countries do not have this as a starting point. Our starting point is the promise that has been made for multiple decades of British people, which is free at the point of delivery. I think any plans that we might have for the NHS, structurally, funding-wise, whatever, have to have as a foundation stone that promise, free at the point of delivery, based on clinical need. I actually think that's a pretty good starting point. There are lots of ways that you could look at that. And actually, one of the other things, being more honest about the conversation. I had a GP, a very left-leaning GP, accost me in my constituency surgery and told me that I was trying to sell off the NHS. And I said, I'm not. And she said, well, there's now all this private enterprise in the NHS. And I went, that's you. You're a GP. And she went, I'm an NHS GP. And I said, do you have an NHS employment number? And she went, these semantics and all. No, it's not semantics. You are not employed by the NHS. You are a private contractor to the NHS. And this is not criticism, it's just an observation. So there has been private function with the NHS since its inception. If we're more honest about that, we can then have a grown-up conversation about what is the best thing for patients? What is the best thing for the system? How best do we fund the system? Does every bit of it have to be funded in the same way as every other bit of it? These are genuinely open questions that we should be asking. But as I say, for me, the foundation stone is free at the point of use based on clinical need.
Rachel Cunliffe here from the New Statesman. One of the trends of the last election was young people, by which we mean sort of everyone under 45, kind of abandoning the Conservative Party. What's your message for younger generations as to why they should vote Conservative or even consider voting Conservative in the future?
Yeah, thank you. So firstly, I'll tell you what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to do what the Labour Party did, which was try and jump on that, marketing script written by Gen Z, cringe video awful.
So the Cleverly TikTok account is not going to be.
No, so I'm not going to do on-trend dances on my TikTok account. And the reason I say that jokingly is because that kind of tokenistic, wear a back-to-front baseball cap and carry a skateboard and assume that that makes you down with the kids. It's just, in my experience, I've got two boys now in their early 20s.
Thought you were going to forget how many children you had.
I know. There is a really well attenuated bullshit detector. So being honest, being yourself, being consistent, and being true to yourself is the starting point. Because if we say things that we don't mean in order to try and curry short-term favour with younger voters, it will not work and will blow back. So we've already discussed things like being able to get on the housing ladder. I've discussed childcare. There are a whole load of policy issues, but again, tonally, is if we come across as grumpy, if we come across as dismissive, if we come across, and I know you're going to pull me up on this again, but if we come across as overly focused with the over 60s rather than the under 40s, all those things will hurt us. So let's change all those things. Many of those are not actually even policy issues. A lot of it's tonal issue. And the other point, if you want people to I'm always struck by how many black people stop me in the street, even those that don't vote Conservative, and ask for selfies and say hello, because I'm a high-profile black Conservative politician. So if we want young people to listen to us, we should have more young people visibly as part of the party. And I tell off associations about this. I say, so when the young people join, don't exclude them, don't make them sit in the corner and shut up. Give them a voice, don't hoard power. Don't have the same person being on the district council, the county council, the fire authority, and the executive of the Conservative Association. Share the love, listen to the newbies, and we'll be in a much better place.
So, on which note, sorry, when we spoke to Robert Jenrick yesterday, the biggest applause line he got was when he promised to end central interference in candidate selection. Is that something that you support as well?
Easy to say. And look, this is the big thing about saying stuff that's easy, doing stuff is hard. Unless you have got a plan for candidate selection, saying I will never parachute candidates in, it's just really, really, really easy to say. But I tell you, because I have been, again, unlike any of the others, I've actually been the chairman of the party. I have actually done candidate selection at an actual general election where we actually won a majority. Write that down.
With a brilliantly written manifesto.
Yes, I remember it was a very good one, actually. I know that saying you will never parachute in candidates is really easy, but if you still have 200 unfilled parliamentary slots and 5 days before close of nominations, you will end up parachuting in candidates, irrespective of what you say. If you don't want to do that, you've got to do what I suggest, which is get on with candidate selection now. I think we need to select about 300 candidates, credible candidates in seats that we want to compete and win in 18 to 24 months. And if you're not willing to do the stuff to make that happen, promising you'll never parachute in candidates, even if you absolutely mean it, I have no doubt that Rob absolutely means it, but even if you mean it, it is undeliverable, you know? And so it's, as I say, saying stuff is easy, doing stuff is hard.
Mark Lloyd-Davies from Cheshire and Amersham Conservatives. You talked about the battlefield you wouldn't fight. What is the battlefield you would fight?
Well, look, we're in the CPS, so unsurprisingly, I'm going to go back to what I believe are Conservative first principles. And we need to ask ourselves and the country some serious questions. Do we feel that as a nation we should be paying more tax or less tax? Do we feel as a nation we should be ramping up regulation on businesses, on enterprises and on individuals, or reducing those things? Do we feel as a nation that we should cross our fingers and hope no one tries to steal our lunch or invade us or damage our interests internationally? Or should we do something about that? Do we want to hope that criminals just get bored and uninvent themselves? Or do we want to make sure that we have credible policing and border control? Now, I think I know what all those answers are, but you would be surprised, perhaps even horrified, by how rarely we actually make that case to the British people and how many people don't necessarily think those things are a good idea, superficially at least. And we discovered that. We've tested this. We put in 2 really significant working age tax cuts in the lead up to the general election. How much credit did it get us? 0. Because we hadn't explained why cutting people's income tax was a good thing. We're Tories. Most of us, no, we're Tories. So when we say, are we going to cut people's taxes? We go, they will love it. Yes, let's do that. You knock on doors and they go, what about my public services? What, you going to sell the NHS? And I'm like, no, it's a tax cut. Yay. Round of applause. They went, what about, how do I get a GP appointment? What about the potholes? Who's going to do this? And because we hadn't explained to them the benefits of them having more of their own money, when we announced it, it didn't do us any benefit. And if anything, it might have even done us a bit of harm. So we have to resell the things that underpin our philosophy. And that's the battlefield on which we should be fighting. That's the agenda around which we should be unifying.
Hi, Sophia Greenblatt, Cancer Research UK. Thank you for visiting our stall earlier.
Thank you.
You'll be glad to hear that your push-ups have made it into the Times.
Almost as if I know what I'm doing.
My question is regarding your earlier statement regarding cancer.
Yeah.
One of our pledges is a long-term cancer strategy based off of our Turning Point for Cancer campaign. The Conservatives previously did have a cancer plan. They instituted one in 2010, and Sajid Javid, as Health Secretary, wanted to institute one as well. Would you, if you were leader, advocate for instituting a long-term cancer strategy specifically on cancer?
Yeah, so and I know this is really weird. After everything I've said, everything I've done, the fundraising that I've done for you and the stuff that Susie has done, you would have thought the obvious answer would be me to say, yes, yes, I will. Write that down, stick it on your stand. So all my instinct says that I want to make sure that screening, early diagnosis, early treatment is prioritised. But I want to do that right across the board. And so, of course, I want that to happen for cancer because, you know, cancer is so prevalent, particularly as we've got, you know, an ageing generation. So yes, and I want to make sure that that way of thinking is not just for cancer, but it's also for things like dementia and heart disease and the other big killers that we have in British society.
The party, I mean, very popular, set up a cancer drugs fund, but that by implication meant that there was no autoimmune drugs fund.
Yeah, and this is the thing, and that's the only reason why I'm not shouting yes, because it is necessary but not sufficient. And what it shouldn't do is, and I do sometimes worry about this, we kind of send an inadvertent message to other bits of the health economy that we only really care about this one. And we mustn't allow that to happen. So there is a philosophy underpinning your request, and that philosophy I actually want to see deployed right across the board.
Rhys Hoggett, Winchester News Online. Hampshire and many other counties are beautiful and green. What incentives would you give NIMBYs?
So I talked about Georgian homes, and what I'm about to say might sound really superficial and thin. People are much less opposed to beautiful things than ugly things. And I know that's just a ridiculously obvious thing to say, but not far from where I was brought up in southeast London, there is a place called Crossness, and it's a Victorian pump works, and it is beautiful. The Victorians were obsessed about plumbing and waterworks. And there are water treatment plants, pumping stations, sewage works dotted all around the UK, and they are beautiful temples to sanitisation of water. And if the Victorians could do it for that, we should be able to do it for residential properties and other properties. It won't solve everything, but actually it will go a long way to getting buy-in from people. So first thing, build it beautiful. It's not much more expensive than building ugly, and it gets through planning a bucket load quicker. So actually you probably save money in the long term. So firstly, build it beautiful. And secondly, as I say, don't be lazy. There's a lot of laziness that goes on in the planning system, which is to say, it is easy to build out. It is easy to sprawl than to rise. That's laziness. So let's get out of that lazy habit, make better use of land space, build better, build beautiful, and actually I think a lot of that objection to construction, home construction and infrastructure construction a lot of it will, I think, frazzle.
So one CPS suggestion on this was that every development should have a visual preference survey attached, so people can see what the development would look like, and one of the 5 options, or at least one of the 5 options, would have to be traditional Victorian Georgian architecture, because it will always win.
Well, the other thing, so I don't like pastiche architecture, but there are things that you can do. So the number of times when you go campaigning across the country, the number of times you meet candidates, and you typically meet them on the corner of the street, there are so many times when I've driven to the suburbs of a part of the UK, stepped out the car and gone, this could be anywhere. This could be absolutely anywhere. Post-war, grey, slab-sided, anywhere. And then you go to the older generation of housing, you're like, oh, I'm in Lancashire, got it. Now I get it. That's the local building material, that's the local slate style, that's the local vernacular. And and so you don't have to have pastiche architecture, but building with more local materials, in a more local style, with a more local vernacular, you get something that just instinctively feels better placed in its environment and is much less likely to be objected to by its neighbours. Hands up who thinks my dad was a surveyor.
Not a toolmaker.
No. Only made one tool, then he got...
Hi, James, Sunder Katwala from British Future. You started on tone, and I wonder, there are real challenges of integration in a diverse society, but does the right risk sounding like it's very pessimistic and it thinks this society is failing?
Yeah, this is one of the things that gets me. If we sound like we hate the country that actually we love, if we sound like we think our best days were in the past, if we sound like we're scared of everybody else and everything else, we should not be surprised if people, particularly young people, don't vote for us. And so we need to change that, because that's not us. I was Foreign Secretary of the UK at a time when the Prime Minister was of Indian descent. The Home Secretary at the time, I think, was Goan, Indian descent. One of her predecessors was a Muslim of Pakistani descent, a former Chancellor of Ghanaian descent, a Trade Secretary of Nigerian descent. For diversity purposes, Jeremy Hunt was around the cabinet table. Got to give the white guys a chance. Got to give them a chance. A little bit of positive discrimination. And I would travel to other countries, and not straight away, but at some point, they would drop in something along the lines of, what's it like, or how do you do it? And funnily enough, the most ethnically homogenous countries found it. I love the Japanese to bits, and they could not get their head around it. They found it absolutely fascinating, could not get their head around it. But the thing that they and the Gulfies and many of my African counterparts and that kind of stuff, the main thing they could not get their head around was the fact that we seemed not to have even noticed. That's us. That's the country I love. The one that accidentally is comfortable with the most visible diversity at the head of its government and its society, kind of by accident. That's who we are. And if you lose sight of that, and if we turn into, an introspective or backward-looking version of ourselves, we will lose out. One of the ways it has historically worked, and this is where I do think we need to make sure we grip it, is that when my mum came from Sierra Leone, she came to a country, so she came to the UK from Sierra Leone. Both countries had the same head of state, had a similar philosophical starting point. She came to the UK because she wanted to be in the UK. She wanted the UK to be the UK, and she wanted to be here. She didn't want the UK to be Sierra Leone. If she wanted to live in Sierra Leone, she'd have stayed in Sierra Leone. She brought Sierra Leonean food. She had Sierra Leonean friends, but she didn't try and break the thing that she went to embrace. That, I think, we have got to get right. We don't have many rules, regulations, or limitations. That's not the same as having none. And just because we are polite, do not mistake politeness for weakness. We have got to enforce the philosophy that has made us the most diverse and tolerant and wonderful country in the world, or we will stop being that thing. And I don't want that to happen.
Hi James, I'm Shannon Lloyd, I'm a party member and I'm also an unsuccessful candidate from the general election we just had.
Temporarily unsuccessful.
Let's assume you've been chosen as the party leader, and ignoring the fact that obviously you're going to lead a very constructive shadow cabinet, ignoring that, what are your priorities for CCHQ, the associations, party members, the actual structure and going forward for the party to be successful at the next election?
Yeah.
And can I just add on that, as the leader of the party, can you please go on GB News during that period, and in your vernacular that would be parking your guns on their lawn, but you don't have to fire them.
Yeah, look, we can't run away from debate. So if you're a party leader, you can't hide from the media. You can't hide from challenging media. You've got to be comfortable getting grilled and really promoting the party that you lead. I think that, particularly in opposition, where you don't have the machinery of government, that's incredibly important. So that whole thing about going on GB News, I've never been afraid of being grilled. I've done more question time appearances, even when there were 6 candidates on the slate, I had done more question time appearances than all the other candidates put together. So, yeah, and absolutely. So, and the same with GB News. I did GB News yesterday morning, and we've got to be willing to take it on the chin. On that one's absolutely key. On CCHQ, a couple of things we need to get right. First thing is, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. It is easy to get a cheap round of applause by blaming everything on CCHQ. But the point is, there are a lot of good people on CCHQ, a lot of people who could have made a lot more money working in the private sector, who helped to try and get us an election victory. They were unsuccessful, but let's not just give them a kicking. Point 1, because demotivating your own troops is seldom a good idea. Point 2, we have got to, though, recognise what went wrong. Our digital campaigning was subpar, was just not there. Our data and data management was not good enough. VoteSource was sending us to the wrong places at the wrong time, and so we need to get a grip of that. We need to fire up our fundraising machine. Now, one of the reasons that I put myself forward is I was approached by a number of people who have been significant donors to us in the past, who stopped donating more recently, who said, I would donate again if you were leader. And frankly, if you don't have money, you can't keep the lights on, you can't do anything. And then I've already talked about candidate selection. Don't just talk about it, actually get on and do it. So those are the things that I would prioritise at CCHQ. And as I say, 3 people can guess what needs to be done. One of us knows what needs to be done because one of us has actually done it before.
We have time for one very quick final question.
Hi, James. Craig Smith, North West Leicestershire Conservatives. You talked about the backbiting, the backstabbing, but this is a culture that almost you've promoted within the parliamentary party for the last 10 years or so. Day one, as leader, how are you going to address this and how are you going to change that culture? Because I feel that, we lost a lot of good parliamentary candidates because of the parliamentary party, and we can't allow that to continue into the next election.
Look, you're absolutely right, and this is probably the most challenging role the new leader will have, because there is at the moment really bad muscle memory. There's really toxic habits that we've slipped into. I keep saying to people, House of Cards was not a training video, But also some of it is down to my own personal behaviour. As I said, I know without fear of hypocrisy, if people misbehave, I can grip them without fear of hypocrisy or accusations of hypocrisy. So I will be comfortable, if needs be, deploying authority in that way. That's not my go-to. What I prefer to do is to inspire, to motivate, to enthuse, to give direction, to give mission, to delegate, and to trust. Now, as I say, I did that when I was party chairman, and we won an 80-seat majority. I did that when I was foreign secretary, and despite the inertia of the Foreign Office civil servants, who are a remarkable bunch of people, but my gosh, they do not like being told what to do by ministers. I actually got them to rebalance British foreign policy, to focus more on emerging markets and less on the comfort blanket of the Euro-Atlantic area. And at the Home Office, despite being told Home Office officials just do not do what you instruct them to do, I got them to kick more bad people out and stop bad people coming in. It can be done, I know, because I've done it. It will be the biggest challenge of my life, doing it with the party. But as I say, all I would ask of others is they behave the way I behaved. And if they say, oh, James, that's naive, that's not how politics works, I'll go, you're right. You're right. Because having been chairman of the party, foreign secretary and home secretary, imagine what I could have achieved if I was a bastard. You know.
On which note, thank you all so much for coming. Conservative Revolution, a history of the Centre for Policy Studies and how Margaret Thatcher, Keith Joseph and a small group of other people saved the Tory party after electoral calamity and rebuilt it into the most successful political party in the Western world, is available for sale outside. Our next event is on a similar theme. In 1999, David Willits wrote a book called After the Landslide for the CPS, which surveyed every single election defeat of the 20th century and looked at how the Tories had rebuilt and recovered and revived and what the common themes were. An updated edition is coming out, incorporating. So David, Carl Williams and Neil O'Brien will be discussing that in 20 minutes. Please do join us, but please, first of all, thank James Cleverly.